Welcome everyone on this sad yet joyous day when we farewell Rexy Boy. Sad as it's the last time we see Dad in this human form, but joyous as we see him transform into the spirit life and to the kingdom of heaven where he rightfully belongs. Today, I would like to provide a little insight into the life and journey of my father Rex. Dad was the seventh child in a family of 13, born in 1943 in Bangladesh. In many ways, he had the classic signs of middle child syndrome, where he often felt left out, less celebrated, and sometimes invisible. He felt too young for the oldies, too old for the young ones. However, the heartfelt support and tribute that we've had as been pouring in the last few weeks suggests that he was anything but left out. In fact, quite the contrary. He was a very special child amongst this huge tribe, and they loved him so very much. So much so that they've been saying the rosary at home every day since he's passed. Dad would love that. He'll be so proud of our attempts, but frustrated at the same time, because each day we shortchanged a decade. Dad completed his high school at St. Peter's, Bangladesh during the late 40s and late 50s. He was a Peterite through and through. In fact, he was the secretary of the Old Boys Union here in Melbourne, and he was always willing to lend a heart and lend a hand. He was a caring man, a great father. In fact, recently, on a visit to Sri Lanka, Dad was at St. Mary's Church in Bangladesh, where he himself was an altar server in the early 50s. But this time, Dad was there for a First Holy Communion, for a young lady that he'd only just been introduced to by my Auntie Kanti. During the Mass, there was a section where the priest invited the parents to accompany the child. Unfortunately, the father of the child was not present at the church. The mother was feeling rejected and alone. She described to me in a letter recently that at that moment of abandonment, she suddenly felt the presence of a gentleman next to her. She turned around and it was Rex. He was that kind of guy, a chivalrous man, a man of honor, and one who would help a stranger in need. During Rexy Boy's time at St. Peter's, he excelled in reading and English. He loved to keep his mind active. In fact, till this day he passed, he challenged himself with various puzzles and general knowledge quizzes. He had a memory like an elephant, probably a body like one too. In fact, one of his distant cousins, who had started up a family tree website on heritage.com, contacted Dad to gain some insight on the Silva family. He had this quote to say on his website. One of the very first members who gave me information about his family was Rex de Silva. He had a fantastic memory of names, dates of birth, and details of every man and his dog. A human archive, unquote. A human archive that he was. In fact, pre-Facebook days, that was the only way that we were notified of when to wish each other. During Dad's adolescence, like all of us, he was searching for his own identity. Like most of the De Silva boys, he was a very talented cricketer, an elegant left-hander with great footwork. He also dabbled in rugby. In fact, taunted his more celebrated brothers Morris and Len about the fact that even though they played for Sri Lanka, he was the only one in the family that could kick with both legs. But Dad was always a little bit different. He was the only brother without the trademark big nose. Dad, in fact, he decided to follow his sister Gloria. In fact, he decided to follow the path of dance and ballet, hence gaining the tag of Twinkle Toes. Ironically, Mum remembers being intrigued by the sight of an older male dancer at the Mac School of Dance in the early 60s. Little did she know, she would soon marry that man in tights. Rex also followed his father, Bernie, and excelled on the tennis court, winning tournaments at the SLTA and here in Australia at Centenary Park down the road. Just the other day, my Uncle Morris was fondly recalling how graceful his younger brother was on the court and at the family home in Lawrence Road. Seemingly, Dad mixed his talents. He used to do pirouettes along with a backhanded overhead smash. In the early 60s brought fond memories of Dad. It was here where he frequented the Bumblepedia Catholic Association. He became acquainted with the game of billiards, where he was a champion amongst the older guys. He also became acquainted with the spirits of the liquid variety. In fact, he earned the name of Stepbrother. Why? Because during these days, he would get so drunk that his friends were too scared to knock on the door at the family home when they had to drop him. They used to just lay him down on the step. And the next morning, he was much dismayed to his mother Laura, who he would sing to in a drunken state. Unfortunately, due to the sudden passing of his older brother Ronald in 1971, Dad continued to intermittently drown his sorrows for some time. We all have our crosses to bear, and this was Dad's. Much to his credit though, he would never miss work. And this would be the same thing right from his first job in Julius St. Creasy in the 1960s, to his post in the Ministry of Defence in Oman, and right through his last job at the Roman courts, where he was still working at the age of 70 only 2 years ago. During his career at Julius St. Creasy, Dad forged many friendships, none of more importance than the one that began in 1974. With a young, naive Shirani Soiza, who had started work at the same firm a year ago. Whilst Dad's love interest till this stage was the church and God, and actually most of his family thought he would end up being a priest, Dad, the usually shy type, built up the courage to finally chaperone Shirani, wait for it, on a Wednesday to the novena at the All Saints Borella. Things were not as swift as Tinder back then. Mum recalls Dad asking her whether she had a boyfriend, to which she replied, yes. Dad then asked, how long for? She replied, 5 years. Dad's jaw dropped. He said, what? He hasn't asked you to marry yet? No, she said. Dad then went on the offensive and said, leave the bugger, marry me, and I'll take you to Australia. Whilst Dad came through on the first part of his promise in the year, and even went one better, and gave Mum their greatest achievement, a son, in 1976. I'm just calling it what's written here, I didn't write this. 10 years later, Mum recalls frustratingly saying to Dad, what men? I'm still in this bloody shithole, they were still in Israel. Eventually, in 1984, Dad fulfilled his promise and migrated the three of us to Australia. The early years were tough for Dad. He tried all sorts of jobs, trying to keep afloat. He even got a job at the Ford Motor Company on the assembly line. Mum and I remembered that day, Dad leaving for work at 7 a.m, coming back at midday, and we thought, wow, this company takes care of its employees. However, Dad confessed later that whilst trying to fit lights on a car on a conveyor belt, he was just too damn slow. The foreman pulled him aside and said, mate, you're not cut out for this manual labour, are you? And I'll tell you what, that foreman was really right. He was definitely a wise man, because even until last week, Dad's hands were as soft as a baby's bum. Dad clearly was built for an office job. Where else would you get away with those increasingly loud ties, ridiculously bright shirts, and of course, the flat cap? I thank all of you here who have made an effort for that in honour of Dad's dress sense. That's probably something that only he could pull off. As the time went by, though, Dad found his feet, and he got back into the office jobs at various government departments. The late 80s and the 90s were happy times for Rex. I fondly recall friends and relatives coming into our home just across the road at St. Peter's on a Friday night, and they would leave on a Sunday night. It was potluck on the menu in the Bessemer, Black Douglas on the table or whatever was on special. Children playing in the garden, music in the cassette player, a sing-along, and if we were lucky, a late-night cabaret by Dad in costumes and all. This was Dad in his element. Friends, family, followed by music, along with food and drink, for all. This was probably the reason for the ever-increasing Santa belly that preceded him when he was middle-aged and afterwards. This, however, did not stop Dad's hospitality. I'm pretty sure he would be really happy to see all of you back at Browns Road this evening, eating, drinking, reminiscing about one of his classic, quick-witted one-liners at his wake after dark. I can see my aunties now in the front grimacing because I've just inadvertently given an open invite to the whole congregation. But you know what? You only die once, and life is too short. You have to make the most of it. And as the Gospel said today, you don't know when the time will come. Sexy Rexy definitely knew that, especially in the last 15 years of his life. He fulfilled all his religious aspirations, travelling to Lourdes, Fatima, Jerusalem, and the Vatican. He made peace with his siblings who had grievances for years. In fact, he would be so happy to see the whole family sit side by side today and in the last 2 weeks. However, I can just see him saying and cursing under his breath, I had to bloody die for these buggers to get together. But he would also say this is the first step in reconciliation. Like Dad's life, I have to bring this eulogy to an abrupt end. Dad's final week was Spring Carnival. Being an avid punter, he would have loved that. His last day with his extended family was on Melbourne Cup. His last able day was on Oaks Day, which he spent shopping for baby clothes for his first grandchild. His last supper was on Thursday with his closest disciples, Mum, Harshada, and myself. Familiar? He broke bread. Okay, he didn't break bread, he had coconut roti, chicken curry, and a dash of garlic. Close enough. But what I'm trying to say is, he went with no regrets and a content man. My dear Father Rex, we will never forget the quick-witted, jovial, caring man with the flat cap, loud tie, Santa belly, twinkle clothes, with a scotch glass in one hand and rosary in the other.
Thank you. Thank you, Anthony. Eloquent, colourful, what do I say? To this, it's very short, but marvellous.